Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first meeting in October. As you can see in the screen, we have a Blue Sky account. We also have a meetup group. That's where you found us. We have a LinkedIn group. We'll probably change that to a company so we can tag people better. And this is our email address. And I do monitor this pretty much every day. So if you want to speak, you have a suggestion, you like something, you don't like something, please tell me why you don't like, what topics you want to hear about, anything. Uh, Please let me know. And then I do monitor this. When do we meet? Like today, it's the second Wednesday of the month. We are meeting at the noontime East Coast, just to be fair to our friends. We'll meet at noon West Coast on the fourth Wednesday of the month. And this is where we'll be recording all this if the speakers agree. So today's session is being recorded and we'll put it in the YouTube channel probably by end of the month. We are all volunteers, so give us some time. Don't ask me after 1 hour where is the recording. It's going to take some time. These are some of the future events. If you see here, I have some blue lines. So these things, I heard the feedback and we are bringing the best from the industry. So a PowerShell series, if some of you do not know Rob Soel, another Jess spelled differently in Europe, Claudia and Jordan Sassi. So they will be doing a session. They will do 3 sessions this year and one of the session will be coming in next year. And then next year, I'm planning from February, there will be a 4 series Databricks. If you've been working with Databricks, you're looking at it, I'm sure you probably saw a video or an article by Ike Ellis. He's one of the best in the country. He's organizing this series that's coming in February. And of course, in between, we have, a couple of other brilliant speakers. So keep an eye all on those. These are all the SQL Saturdays and Data Saturdays. These are pretty much 1 day free event that's coming up. Paresh has one, Julie has one. Mine was just 2 weeks ago. So look those up and they're all over the world. And this is our yearly biggest conference. As a past summit, November 17 to 21st in Seattle. Uh, I have a quote for you. That's what I'm trying to get to save some time. And they have been, the PAS was on tour first time that I know of. So PAS was in different cities. They just finished all this for. So I'm going to remove this slide from next time. But it was a lot of fun in New York. I was in New York. Paresh, I think, was in Dallas. And it happened in Europe too. So this is a code that you can use, UGRP001. You get $150 off of a 3-day ticket. And I'm passing it to Jess. I'm not going to talk about Jess's bio. I'll let Jess talk as much as Jess wants. And we all thank Jess for coming up. She's a busy schedule, a lot of demand, but I thank her. I'm going to keep quiet. Jess will take it from here. If you have any questions, comments about this particular presentation or any logistics, put in the chat. You won't be able to unmute yourself, but Jess will monitor the chat for technical question. I will monitor it for any logistic questions. So Jess, off to you. I'm going to take off camera and mic.
All right. Well, thank you, Tayob. I appreciate it. I thank the DBA user group for having me come and present. So my topic today is securing your Azure SQL estate. I am going to be talking about some Azure security, some Azure SQL managed instance, and SQL database security as well. So for those of you that I don't know yet, my name is Jess Chapman. I'm a cloud solution architect focused on Azure data at Microsoft. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. I love the outdoors. I love running. And where Tayob had asked for speakers earlier, highly encourage you give speaking a try. It is one of the things that has brought me the most joy and a lot of benefits out of my career. And I am always open to mentoring speakers as well. So if you have an idea and you'd like some help, I'm here for you. Also, I have a Blue Sky account. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And I have a GitHub repo in which I keep some of my Azure and Azure SQL projects available. Please feel free to check those out. So what I want to talk about today is going to be a topic that is always going to be relevant, and it is that of security. I always say that an organization's data is an organization in this day and age, right? A company does not exist without their data, and we are still to this day hearing about security breaches, ransomware attacks, all of that. If you are a data administrator, Azure administrator, app developer, it is part of your job to ensure that you are building on the most secure foundation that you can. When I help customers move an app and data into Azure or build something new in Azure, we follow this well-architected framework, and one of the pillars there is security, right? We need to be able to be protected from and resilient to attacks. We need to be confidential. We need to have integrity. We need to have security. So in our world of security, I like to talk about it from two different perspectives, what I call the 2A's, the authentication and the authorization piece. Authentication is verifying that you are who you say you are, or anyone trying to get into a technology system is who they say they are. And authorization is once you're in, what do you have access to? What level of access do you have? This is really especially important in the world of data. Think about, maybe even a shared database among different employees, different customers, different suppliers. The example I like to give, if you ever need help keeping this straight, is thinking about traveling, particularly via airplane, right? You have to go through both authentication and authorization. In a situation like this, right? You have to present a photo identification to TSA or other security and prove that you are who you say you are. Like, I am Jess Chapman. Here's a picture. This says I am Jess Chapman. And I also have to go through another layer of authorization. I have to take that boarding pass that I have, present it to my gate agent, and prove that not only can I get on that airplane, but also that I am sitting in the right seat. So this is what we work on with our data security as well. In this presentation, I'm going to focus more on the second A of authorization. When we talk about authentication, particularly in Azure, there are other mechanisms that will take care of that, right? The gateway into Azure. Do you have Entra ID authentication? Do you have the right tokens? Are you using multi-factor authentication? For your SQL Server, we'll talk a little bit about the authentication piece and what options there are. But just, we're focusing more on kind of what rights do you have and how do you make sure that the right users have access to the right information. As we go through this, again, if you have questions, please drop them in chat. I've got that open on my second screen. I love answering questions as I go so I don't get to the end of the presentation and forget completely what I talked about. All right. So when we talk about Azure and security, particularly with our databases, I like to emphasize that there are two very different planes of existence, so to say, two different layers that you need to be aware of and control for. And these two different layers have different mechanisms for that authorization. So the first level that we need to work through is our Azure control plane. The Azure control plane applies to all Azure resources. The Azure control plane gives us the ability to create any sort of resource, whether we are creating a new virtual machine, a storage account, a function app, a database, whatever that is, and then anything that has to do with that at that Azure level. When I think about it in particular for SQL, I think about creating a new logical SQL server, creating a new managed instance, being able to scale up the number of cores, add more storage, create a private endpoint, fail a database over from one region to another. Those are all control plane mechanisms, and they are taken care of through RBAC, or role-based access control. We also then, sitting on top of that separately, is our data plane. And this is where we control access to the database engine and the data itself. Things that take place at the data plane level are getting access to a database, being able to, if you're an admin, create other users within the server or database, being able to run any sort of query, whether that's a select or an insert, and making changes to the database structure itself, changing compatibility levels, changing collations, adjusting, tempDB, something like that. So the data plane is taken care of through a combination of that Entra ID authentication and SQL authentication. We're going to talk more about the control plane side of things initially, because when you're working with SQL Server running in an Azure virtual machine or a database in a SQL managed instance or a standalone Azure SQL database, there are some differences in the concepts of server level logins versus users, and I'll touch on those, what the differences are. But for the most part, how you're used to managing logins and users is exactly the same. You have your database level roles, you have grant permissions, you have deny permissions, you have execute permissions. So from a data plane perspective, I'll be talking more about what some of the standout things here are for Azure. I really want to dive into RBAC first, or this role-based access control. So every Azure operation is controlled by what your RBAC assignment is when you log into Azure. So again, this is not specific to just SQL database or SQL MI. Every Azure resource, the subscription, the resource group, a server, a function app, has RBAC assigned to it. RBAC is both, you can assign individual users to different roles. You can put groups, you can do service principals, you can do managed identities. The biggest thing to note is that this is, at least in the context of this, it's completely decoupled from your SQL logins and users. I can have a user who has admin rights at the control plane. They can create new databases. They could, or they could create new servers. They could scale those up and down. They can do failovers, and they would have no access to the databases themselves. Vice versa, I can create an Entra ID login within my database, but that user could have no permissions or maybe just some like really basic reader permissions at the actual Azure level. And that's why I think it's really important for Azure admins, Azure SQL admins, Azure app admins to understand this RBAC concept. So Azure RBAC is going to apply regardless of whether you are using the portal or whether you log in through the REST API, CLI, PowerShell, whatever it is, your identity will be verified. You'll be given the same permissions regardless. One of the benefits of this method is that separation of duties. Again, there may be a set of admins that are responsible for maintaining your Azure estate, maintaining the Azure security, and they should not have any access to the databases themselves. They should not have any access to the data. On the other hand, there's also app users and app identities that don't need access to the underlying infrastructure. So let's take a quick look at the Azure portal for anyone that may not have regular access to this. So I'm in Azure and I'm in a resource group called my Acme Dev US. And how I get to see like what, and I'm at a resource group level. Now, how I can see the current RBAC assignments for any Azure resource are right here in this menu on the left under Access Control, IAM. I think that stands for Identity and Access Management. So here I can, for any given resource that I am looking at, I can see my assignments, right? So I can say, what do I have access to here? I can search for others as well. I'm going to use one of my coworkers, Jared, because I know he has some access here. So I can see that I, Jess Chapman, for my permanent assignments, I am an owner of the subscription and I'm an Azure AI user at the subscription level, whereas my teammate Jared, he is a reader at this resource level, so he can view resources but not change them. And come here, I can do other things like make other role assignments, make individual roles. I can deny certain things. So if you've ever wondered where that's done in Azure, that is the panel for it. And again, it applies to any and all different resources we have. If I will be using a logical SQL server for some examples. So let's pull one of those up. Here is my logical SQL server. And again, if I go to access control, I can see my access and I can see other people's access as well. So that's just a quick view of where you start with RBAC. Now, Azure has a bunch of built-in roles. We'll talk about those on the next slide. They're pretty generic, and it's really hard to say that an Azure role can be directly related to a specific service. So most services inside of Azure also have a set of predefined roles to help narrow the permissions for that specific service. So there are, function app roles, there are storage account roles, and there are also 4 roles for SQL, a SQL DB contributor, managed instance contributor, security manager, and server contributor. So talking a little bit through this, so Azure RBAC. For Azure All Up, we start with owners, then go down to contributors, RBAC or security admins, and readers. Very few people are All Up Azure owners. Owners have access to manage all resources and assign or deny all roles. Owners are truly full admins of their resource. And again, this could be as simple as a database. This could be as simple as a storage account. It could be an entire resource group, a whole subscription, or even a tenant. In my experience, the owner role is very limited, and it should be. Now, another role that has similar but not security permissions is the contributor role. So someone with an Azure contributor access on, say, a resource group would have the ability to create new resources within that resource group, delete resources, scale them up, scale them down. They don't have any ability to give other users permissions within that, say, resource group. Conversely, we have the RBAC or security admin. The only thing that an RBAC admin could do, again, with a SQL server, with a storage account, with a resource group or a subscription, is assign the correct permissions to users, service principals, managed identities. They don't have the ability to create resources. They don't have the ability to assign Azure policies. They don't have the ability to, monitor things. And last but not least is the reader. And this is typically something I would see, I would set up for app devs or DBAs at like a resource group level. So you can see what resources are available. You can see some of their basic properties, but you can't make any changes and you can't assign anything to anyone. So again, that's at the Azure level. Let's take a look at some examples of like what that might look like in an environment and who might have those permissions. So let's look at that Acme Dev subscription that I have set up. Within my subscription, I have two resource groups. I have a Dev East US and a Dev West US. So two separate resource groups. Each resource group has its own two logical SQL servers for putting databases on. So looking at some roles that we have within our company, let's say we have three people we're going to focus on for this presentation. Davide is our IT admin. He's on our cloud ops team. Davide is one of the few people that is going to have subscription owner access. So Davide is at that green level. He can do anything. He can create resource groups, create storage accounts, networking, SQL servers within those storage accounts. He also would have the ability to create RBAC roles, assign users or identities to those roles. Basically, can do anything and everything. Again, very, very high level permission when you are an owner of a resource. We also have Amara. Amara is on our SecOps team, so she's a security admin. She is one of the people that is in charge of reviewing all of the permissions. And when new users join, she helps with managing them in Entra ID, putting them in the correct groups. She helps manage which groups have access to which resources in Azure. She is also part of the team that does things like makes sure apps have managed identities assigned to them and makes sure those managed identities have the correct access to the correct apps. So because she is set as an RBAC administrator at this subscription level, the green level, she can change those roles and assign people at any level here. So at the group level, at the SQL Server level, even at an individual database level. Our third employee is going to be Kevin, and he is our database administrator. At the subscription level, Kevin is a reader. So he can see that there are resource groups. He can see that there are SQL servers. He could even go in and maybe view the activity logs. But Kevin doesn't have any access beyond that. He can't create new resource groups. He can't assign users to them. He can't create new servers. He can't stop databases. He can't delete storage accounts. So we're going to follow the journeys of Davide, Amara, and Kevin as we start getting deeper into these resource groups and their resources. And there we go. Now, those 4 Azure RBAC roles are very generic. For the purposes of our presentation, right, focusing on Azure SQL, we want much more fine-grained permissions that define things like who can access our databases, who can create virtual networks and subnets for our managed instances, and all of that. So there are 4 built-in Azure SQL RBAC roles as well. So we have the SQL database or SQL DB contributor. So note, this is separate from SQL MI contributor. So if you are using SQL database, you might have one set of permissions. SQL MI might have another. And that's typical because managed instance, especially with its need for virtual network subnets, network security groups, all of that does have a different set of Azure level permissions than just a SQL database. So if you are a SQL DB contributor, what can you do? You are able to manage SQL databases. And that means that you could create a SQL database, you could scale it up, you could scale it down, you could delete it. It does not mean that you have access to the SQL database by default. So just because you are an Azure SQL RBAC contributor and you can create a new database at the Azure level, does not mean that you are automatically given a login to the Azure database. You don't have the ability to manage the security, so you can't give other users the RBAC access. And note that you cannot manage individual SQL servers, that logical SQL server that can hold multiple databases. That is its own role. So SQL MI contributors, again, they can manage the managed instance, the cores, the storage, the network configuration. They don't automatically have access to the managed instance, and they cannot give access to others. The SQL Server contributor, so this is kind of tied to the SQL database. Remember, one logical SQL server can have one or many SQL databases. So at the SQL Server contributor level, you can manage the server level settings. When I think about things at the server level, I think of, backup retention policies for databases, networking configuration, some amount of security features, TDE, that sort of thing. However, they don't, again, by default, don't have access to the individual databases. They can't change the RBAC roles. We separately have a SQL security manager who can manage the RBAC for SQL servers, SQL databases, and SQL MI. But again, don't by default get a login in the master database or any of the individual databases themselves. So digging into our resource group. So we have this resource group Dev East US. This resource group has 2 SQL servers in it. Those logical SQL servers have multiple databases on each. So let's look at our 3 IT folks again here. So Davide, remember, he's an IT administrator. He's on the Cloud Ops team. He is the subscription owner. So within this resource group, he could create a new SQL server. He could create a SQL database. He could delete a SQL server. He could delete a SQL database. He could create and delete or scale up or scale down a managed instance. He could make our storage accounts for us, fix our networking. He has the ability to assign people to different RBAC roles. Again, at that subscription owner or even resource group owner level, really high permissions can do anything. We also have Amara on the SecOps team because, as a security admin, she has also been given SQL Security Administrator, RBAC role. In this case, some specific abilities that this SQL Security Admin role has, additional things that are part of her scope of responsibility, are being able to create and manage auditing. That might be a necessary thing that, again, kind of allows for that separation of duties that you might need. She also could do things like change advanced threat protection settings for a server or a specific database, be able to, and advanced threat protection turns on some additional things like, are you getting denial of service attacks? Do we see a large number of login attempts coming from an unknown IP address? Are there any potential SQL injection attacks happening? So a security admin, again, might be part of a security team. A DevOps team might be different from the DBAs, probably very different from the app dev team. Being able to have these individual roles lets you make sure that the correct people and teams have access to the correct information without just blanket, owner permissions. Now, if we look at Kevin, once we get into this resource or at the SQL Server level, the purple boxes here. So Kevin on our DBA team, he has been given two roles. So Kevin is both a SQL Server contributor and a SQL database contributor. So what this means is Kevin has a wide range of abilities within the SQL world. He can create and delete SQL servers. He can create and delete and scale up and scale down SQL databases. He also has the ability to edit some of the audit settings. He could, from a security perspective, edit data masking policies if you've set that up for a server or databases. And he has the ability to view the Azure Monitor metrics for the servers and databases. I like to take a pause here on this and say, mention something that I didn't necessarily call out in this presentation, but is really vital for your Azure estate. And that's resource locks. Let me actually pop back into my SQL server here. So I keep mentioning that admins in particular, and contributors even in some cases, have the ability to create resources, scale up, modify resources, and they have the ability to delete. There's a lot of reasons you don't want a database deleted. You don't want a SQL server or a SQL managed instance deleted. You don't want a resource group deleted. So Azure has this concept of resource locks there, again, at every level: an individual database, a SQL server, a resource group, a storage account, anything. It is best practice for every resource to add what is called a delete lock. So there's two types of locks on a resource. You can have a delete lock or you can have a read-only lock. Read-only means that this is a readable resource only. There we go. That was hard to say. More important to me is the delete lock. So when I put a delete lock on the SQL server, now let's go back to my permissions. At this SQL server level, I am an owner. And what it says right here grants full access to manage all resources, including the ability to assign roles. As a matter of fact, if I go up one level to this resource group, go into my access control, remember here, even at the resource group, I am an owner. So I should have full, total, absolute admin permissions. Go back to that SQL server with its, let's just verify again, there is a delete lock. So now as a subscription, resource group, and SQL Server owner, let's say that I come here and select delete this database. I have to type the server name. It's going to delete all of my databases. I'm going to hit it. And note that immediately it failed to delete the server. It throws the specific error code 409 and says, please remove the lock and try again. Delete locks are, in my opinion, a non-negotiable for your Azure resources. So just a quick security tip there, because it does prevent anyone, and I do mean anyone, from deleting them. I'll take a pause here and see if there's any questions. None yet. Again, remember, if you have any questions, please do drop them in the chat. All right, so those are, again, the Azure RBAC roles and then the Azure SQL RBAC roles. Now, sometimes that's not quite enough. You have the ability to create custom RBAC roles. These can be assigned to, again, users, Entra groups, and even service principals. One of the benefits of custom RBAC roles is that they are not just at a resource group or a subscription level. They actually can be shared between subscriptions in different tenants even. And that's not always the case with things across Azure. So how we go about creating RBAC roles is we determine what permissions are needed, and then we create those. We can do it in the Azure portal. We could do it in PowerShell. We could do it in CLI. We could do it through the REST API. If this is something you are curious about, it's a little bit outside the main scope of this presentation, please connect with me. I can send you some information on it. But just understand that there's this whole list of roles or actions in Azure. For example, anything that falls under SQL servers is under the Microsoft.SQL/servers set of actions. Here, I'm looking at also one level deeper, which is the databases set of actions. So what I could do as an example is say, okay, I want to give my users the ability to be a SQL Server contributor. However, in addition to a delete lock, I also want to make sure that users cannot change the point in time restore days on a database, because I don't want to have the potential for someone to take and say, oh, my 30-day retention is moved down to 7 and just delete 21 days of point in time backups. And this is a real world example. I have helped build this for customers. So we created a role, and for Microsoft SQL Server databases, backup, short-term retention policies, right? That was a not action. So when you create a policy, when you create these RBAC, this is the actions and these are the not actions. So we would say, like, this is something specifically that these users do not have access to do. And these actions/not actions exist around not just reading and writing and scaling, but also for things like changing backup short-term, changing backup long-term settings, auditing, monitoring, all sorts of things. So if you are finding that there is something users are able to do, you want to prevent them from doing that, you can look into custom RBAC roles. They are a powerful tool within Azure. So that is the control plane aspect of that authentication and authorization. Authentication happens through your Entra ID, your user, your groups that you're put in, service principals, and managed identities for things like apps and other Azure resources. We really want to become familiar with our RBAC roles, both at the Azure level and at the SQL level. But now we want to also talk about that other part of it, which is the data plane level. So how do you give users and groups access to those servers and instances and databases that are created if just having RBAC doesn't automatically grant someone access to your database, how do they get in? So this is the process that it takes. Number one, when you deploy any new SQL server for databases or a new managed instance, during the creation time, you have to specify at least one admin account. On both MI and database, you have three options. You can do Entra ID authentication only, which is recommended best practice, SQL authentication only, or a combination of those. So when your server/instance is initially created, there is one or two admin users. So after that is created, then this admin account has the ability to potentially create other admins. And again, this can be SQL users with admin rights, Entra ID users with admin rights. Underneath that, then, admins can create users, right? And these can be individual logins, they can be groups, they can be the managed identities. And then from there, this is where we start getting into very familiar territory for SQL admins, where you would grant access to databases, schemas, tables, views, procedures, grant, deny, execute. This piece at the bottom here is not vastly different in SQL MI or SQL database. So a few notes about configuring logins and users. And I realized I really wanted to show like one half of this at a time. But so a SQL database, just a couple things to note here. Again, during deployment, you are going to have to create at least one admin. The biggest thing that I like to point out here is that in Azure SQL database, because this is not a fully isolated SQL instance, there's a logical master database, but it's not the master database. There's no specific sysadmin role. That's a change coming from SQL Server or SQL managed instance. So these logical SQL Server admins get like admin permissions in that master database and are members of DB owner within individual databases created on the server. And then again, you can create server level logins. They can have limited admin permissions. They can just have other permissions at that logical master database level. And after that, other database users can be created. So keep in mind that SQL database, the service is using contained databases. So in this case, there can be a login at the server level and a user within the database itself, but they do not have to be related. It is always created as a contained database. Now on the managed instance side, here, again, when you deploy the managed instance, you create an admin, whether that's Entra ID or SQL. This is granted full admin permissions. Here, because it is a true instance of SQL Server, you get added to the sysadmin role and member of DB owner. This admin, again, has the ability to create other admins and server level logins. And the database users can then be created. Again, SQL MI uses contained databases. The logins and users could be associated, but they don't have to be. The managed instance is going to be much closer to the SQL Server security paradigm. It's exactly the same. It is a full instance, basically just running on virtual machines in your virtual network, in your subscription, in your resource group. SQL database being a true platform as a service offering, you don't have access to that underlying instance level. And so it does require a couple of extra things. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about the fact that without a true sysadmin role, and with this additional layer of having the logical master database, there are some special roles that have been created for SQL database itself. So these three are the database manager, the login manager, and the database connector. So these three roles apply to a login created at that logical SQL server level in this master database. So you can assign database manager permissions. So this gives this user access to create databases, delete databases, own the databases, and be DBO, but no other options. So this database manager cannot add other users, add other logins, change security settings. That's why we have the login manager. So this login manager has the ability to create and delete logins. It does not give them access to grant permissions in the databases themselves. Think of this as kind of remember at that RBAC level, we had the SQL Server, SQL Database, and SQL MI contributors. And then the SQL Security Manager, it's kind of that, just an ability to be able to grant access, but not change anything else. There's also this interesting role called Database Connector. And it gives this login in the logical master database the ability to connect to any database within the server, but not require a user within each database. And if you would have 10 databases and you wanted to access 8 of them, you could deny 2 of them. I would say this is most frequently used in something like monitoring tools, DevOps tools, that sort of thing. So what does this look like? So let's look at a logical SQL Server and database example. We have Kevin, right? Kevin is a member of our Entra ID SQL admin group, and he's been given a SQL Server admin login. So on this, so let's look at the SQL Server. So at the logical server level, this is a mixed mode authentication. We do have a SQL admin. It's called SQL admin. We have an Entra ID admin login, so SQL admins at Acme Resources. And again, Kevin is part of this group. So Kevin has the ability to create other users or create other logins, create other users, create databases, delete databases, all of that. We also have 2 other server level logins. There's a SQL login called Deploy Admin and an Entra ID login called App Monitor. The deploy admin is used for CI/CD pipelines, right? So that helps to deploy things, and the app monitor is for monitoring. So again, these are just cases of what we see in real life here, and so those are the kinds of logins we can set at the individual server level. And then let's look at these databases we have. So we have a database for US, Canada, and Mexico. SQL admin, that SQL admin login at the server level, is also a SQL user within each database. We also have the SQL login of deploy admin, which is a SQL user within each database. Again, runs our CI/CD pipelines. We also, within each of the databases, have a separate SQL user, right? Green, blue, red, white, and blue, red. These are used for additional tasks. You'll note those individual database users do not exist at the server level. They do not have to. You'll note that we also have some individual Entra ID users within each database that do not exist at the SQL server level, just showing that these are contained databases. You create either SQL auth logins or Entra ID so SQL auth users or Entra ID auth users that are contained within the database themselves. And again, they can be individual users or groups. Managed instance, very similar. So looking at a managed instance. Here we've set this one up with the mixed mode auth as well. So we have our SQL admin. We also have our Entra ID admin. We have that same SQL login deploy admin for our CI/CD pipelines. We have an Entra ID login of app monitor for monitoring software. And again, here we're able to create the SQL user deploy admin in each database. We can create individual SQL authentication users in each database. We can create individual Entra ID users within each database. So my best practices, again, or kind of the way to go about setting up this SQL authentication and authorization. When you're looking to set up your subscriptions, your resource groups, your servers, your instances, you will need to determine what users or roles have the Azure RBAC permissions at the subscription and the resource group level. Who has the ability to create new resources within a resource group? Who has the ability to assign permissions within the resource group? Who has the ability to scale things, and who is simply a reader, right, a viewer? Then going another step further, right, determine the users or roles for, again, you have your SQL managed instance, SQL server, SQL database, and then your SQL security admin. And remember, those 4 Azure SQL built-in roles are guidelines. They're very generic. And if they're not good enough, custom roles can be created. Now, within your logical SQL servers and SQL managed instances, you need to determine if you're going to use Entra ID authentication only, SQL authentication only, or both, mixed mode. Entra ID authentication only is best practice, recommended, very tight security. And we are not necessarily at an Entra ID only world, especially for maybe legacy apps that are being migrated into Azure or things where we have to have older tools line up with them. So we do offer the ability for both. And then again, the next question to ask is, especially on SQL Server and SQL database, are you going to just have your users exist within the database, or do you need to put anything into the Azure SQL Server logical master database? All right, and I told Teob and Paresh that I hoped to end about 5 minutes early to leave a few minutes for questions, and I am exactly on time. I must have had just the right amount of coffee this morning. So that is my walkthrough for an Azure SQL kind of secure estate. We consider both the Azure control plane side and the data plane side. With that, I'll leave a few minutes for your questions, comments, and thoughts. And again, please connect with me on Blue Sky, connect with me on LinkedIn, check out my GitHub repo. I don't see any questions in chat, but please don't be afraid.
The only familiar name is Lee Markham. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, thanks, Tam. Yeah, okay, so there's a question about the do not delete again, and I would love to reconsider and talk about the locking mechanism again. So going up to my resource group level under settings, I can see it listed as locks. On any given resource within the resource group, like a storage account, if I come into it, I see, I don't know where it is necessarily, settings, locks. So there is a lock called, a lock type called a delete lock. So setting this, a lock type of delete on any resource, whether it's a specific database, a server, a storage account, a network security group, a resource group as a whole, means this resource cannot be deleted by anyone. I own this entire subscription and this resource group and all of these resources. When a delete lock is set, no one can delete this resource. So I've put it on this storage account. If I go back to overview and select delete, and I try to copy it, the name right here, this one specifically says Acme Dev East US 2 can't be deleted because this resource or its parent has a delete lock. Locks must be removed. So that is just simply not allowed. That resource cannot be deleted. So best practice all up for Azure is set a delete lock on everything. In non-production subscriptions, in production subscriptions, on individual containers within your storage accounts, on networks, on databases, like everything should have a delete lock. The next question was, is removing the do not delete lock logged somewhere? Well, let's go back to that storage account and go to the activity log. Okay. If I go, so I set the lock, and then let's delete this lock. Do not delete was done. I believe, yeah, so if I go here, right, this notification shows me the activity log. So these should be logged in the activity log for the resource. To answer your question. This activity log can be a little bit asynchronous, so sometimes you might not see, right now it's just showing the added lock. It hasn't shown the deleted the lock yet, but it will. So anytime you want to look at Were locks added? Were locks removed? These come under the resources activity log. And because everyone will ask who did it, there is, as part of it, if we look at it, we can see who the event was initiated by. We can even view the full JSON of the request.
What is the longevity of this activity log?
I want to say, that's one of those Azure things. I want to say it's about 90 days to view it here in the resource. And most organizations will set this up to send the information to log analytics and maybe persist the information for a longer amount of time. Again, generally, I see about 90 days here for any resource. Worth talking to your specific Azure admins to see what the settings are in your org and if they keep the data for any longer. Yeah, and you can see this stuff can be exported, it can be downloaded, it can be put into log analytics, lots of options there. So Todd asks, will it prevent deleting the blob service or databases? Yes, a delete lock means it simply cannot be deleted, period. And it's cascading. So if you put a delete lock on the resource group, it's like the resource group and its underlying resources cannot be deleted. So I say the higher you can set those delete locks, the better. And what is the roles that can delete a lock? I want to say you have to be an owner. Let me verify that. So Azure delete lock. Who can create or delete locks? Okay, so users assigned owner and user access administrator roles have the required access. Some specialized built-in roles grant this access, or again, kind of like we talked about creating a custom role. These are the actions that you would need to have. I can create and delete the delete locks in my subscription because I am an owner of the subscription. Okay, I know we're just a couple minutes over. Again, thanks everyone. This has been great. I love talking about SQL stuff, and I want to thank Teob and Paresh for having me join.